If you're the primary breadwinner, you may be wondering if you'll have to pay alimony after your divorce. Hi, I'm Max Ruthenberg-Marshall, attorney and founder of Porchlight. Today, I'm going to be addressing how alimony is handled in Georgia divorces. If you're worried about paying alimony, the good news is that alimony is becoming more disfavored in Georgia divorces, especially in Metro Atlanta. That doesn't mean that alimony isn't awarded at all, just that the awards tend to be for shorter amounts of time and lower amounts of money. Again, this doesn't mean that you won't have to pay alimony, but typically in divorces, the primary financial components that have most of the financial impact are going to be the division of assets and debts and child support. So let's talk about some situations where alimony is likely. If one spouse has been out of the workforce for an extended period of time, rehabilitative alimony may be necessary to help that spouse get back into the workforce. Or if one spouse is unable to work, say for medical reasons, then they might need to have some alimony to be supported going forward. Also, if one spouse is an extremely high income earner and the other spouse is not, an alimony award is more likely. But just because you make more than your spouse doesn't mean that you will necessarily have to pay alimony. We're talking about people where there's actually a significant difference between the incomes. If you're both solidly middle income and have similar earning capacities, alimony might not be appropriate in your case. Let's talk a little about how alimony works. First of all, alimony is not intended to be a punishment for the person paying it or a reward for the person receiving it. It's about making sure that the spouse with a lower income earning ability is financially okay after the divorce. In cases where there are children, a lot of people are worried that once they're paying child support and alimony, it's going to be too expensive for them. But child support is actually considered, as is the entire financial picture, when determining alimony. So if your incomes are not too disparate or depending on the amount of child support that's being paid, it might actually bring the incomes to rather similar amounts in each household and mean that alimony is no longer necessary. Alimony can be paid in a lump sum one-time payment or in periodic or monthly installments. Monthly installments are by far the most common form of alimony. Alimony can also be modifiable or non-modifiable, and that's something that you and your spouse can negotiate when reaching an agreement on alimony. Typically, if alimony is modified, it's modified because the receiving spouse is cohabitating with a new romantic partner, or because one of the spouses has died and alimony is no longer applicable. Alimony used to be awarded for 1/3 to 1/2 the length of the marriage, and that is a timeline that you'll still see cited pretty often, but that really isn't what the current trends in alimony are doing. I'd say in a lot of cases they are awarded for more like 1/3 of the marriage or less, rather than that 1/3 to 1/2 range. Again, it depends on the total financial picture, but alimony awards tend to be getting shorter. So how does a judge actually determine alimony? Well, there's no formula for alimony, and judges have broad discretion in how much alimony they set and how long it's going to last for. I highly recommend that you try and negotiate an agreement in your divorce with your spouse that includes an agreement on alimony. You will have a lot more control over the situation. Both parties will have a lot more control over the situation if you reach an agreement. If you go in front of a judge, it is much less predictable what the outcome is going to be, so reaching an agreement is always better. But if you do go in front of a judge, there are some factors that the judges consider. And when you're trying to reach an agreement, you consider those same factors because you do want to look to the guidelines that we do have in the law in determining what amount and duration of alimony would be reasonable. So one factor that courts consider is the length of the marriage. In shorter marriages, alimony is less commonly awarded, and in longer marriages, where the finances make it appropriate, it is more commonly awarded. If you've only been married for a year or two, even if there's a significant difference in your and your spouse's income, alimony just might not be appropriate for the situation because you really haven't been together that long. The court will also look if either party has contributed to the other's career or education. So for example, if one party supported the other party while that party was going to school, and now that party has their degree and their income earning capacity is significantly higher because of that, that could be a factor that's considered in determining alimony. The court will consider both parties' age and physical health. So for example, if one party is retired or close to retirement, the court isn't going to expect that party to work forever just in order to pay alimony to the other party. The court's also going to consider the entire financial picture. So that is the current income of each of the parties, as well as their income earning ability, and the assets and debts, what they have in their possession, and how the marital assets and debts were divided. The court does consider the parties' standard of living during the marriage, but I would say it's not typically a very weighty factor. There's a rumor that alimony is supposed to be designed to keep up the spouse's standard of living that they experience during the marriage, but mathematically that is actually impossible. So for example, let's say you have a married couple where one spouse earns $200,000 a year and the other spouse doesn't earn anything. If you divide them into two households and you divide the income of the earning spouse evenly between the parties so that they each have $100,000, they can't live up to the standard of a $200,000 income household that they were living at during the marriage. It's just mathematically impossible when you take the income and divide it over two homes. The expenses have doubled and the income has usually not halved, but has been split between the parties. Although we talked about how alimony is not a punishment or reward, there is one moralistic aspect of the law that is considered when determining alimony, and that is whether or not the spouse seeking alimony has considered adultery. If the spouse who is asking for alimony has committed adultery that ended the marriage, then that spouse is actually barred from receiving alimony. Now, whether or not an adulterous relationship ended a marriage or not is a pretty big question of fact for the court to determine. So you can imagine both parties probably don't agree on that in a lot of circumstances, and you really don't want to air that dirty laundry in front of the judge, or the courtroom in general. So it is better still to reach an agreement with your spouse, even if adultery took place in their relationship. Alimony is a highly emotional issue in a divorce. If you would like help reaching an agreement on alimony outside of court, Porchlight is here to help. Give us a call.